All right, for more on this, we are now being joined by Colonel Rich Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Colonel Outzen, always a pleasure speaking with you and hearing your thoughts on trending matters. So, this growing cooperation between Moscow and Tehran, which now also has a nuclear moniker attached to it, owing to these recent reports. When you see this in the backdrop of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, escalations in West Asia and the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, after which Tehran vowed a major retaliation against Israel, which has not happened yet. What kind of a dimension does this now add to the already brewing tensions?
Well, it's good to be with you. I think the top thing that sticks out for me is that it just increases the requirement for effective cooperation among the Western powers, the United States, its European allies, countries that are under threat like Israel and Ukraine, because essentially what we're seeing is a military axis that is led by Russia in its war in Ukraine, but has this element and dimension of cooperation between not just Russia and Iran with the technical exchange of weapons and expertise, but also North Korea, which has been involved with arming Russia for its war in Ukraine, but also supplying Iran and Hamas. There was evidence that some of the tunnels in Gaza had been constructed with assistance from North Korean engineers. So it's really, if you want to call it an axis of evil or a resistance axis, they're just tightening their military coordination and cooperation that much more with every year. And that means the West has to be even that much more coordinated if it wants to stop the aggression of the Russians in Ukraine and the aggression of Iranians regionally targeting Israel and others.
Colonel, now there are a few statements that have reportedly come in. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Pentagon officials reportedly said that US can't supply many more long-range missiles to Ukraine because it needs to keep a healthy reserve for itself in case there was an outbreak of fighting in Europe or Asia, essentially aiming or talking about China here as well. A few days before this, the Pentagon and the Department of Defense had mentioned that there is no one capability or a silver bullet to help Ukraine win or make it a game changer for it. Do you find it plausible that a defense giant like the US needs to pull back from arming Ukraine to prepare its own reserves? Just give us your thoughts on these statements.
Right. Well, so especially when it comes to high-tech munitions, so guided missiles and long-range rockets and air-to-ground munitions, things like that. The problem is that over the last 20 years, the West, and by that I mean the United States, but also many of its European allies, really restricted and restrained the size of its defense industrial base. We just don't have that many companies that produce these sorts of munitions. So it's not so much that the inventories were small at the start of the war. We have large inventories, but you can't replenish the inventories that quickly. Now, the good news is that even though some of the long-range rockets and the sort of high-tech weaponry is in short supply, we can gradually expand production. That needs to be done. But there's also other systems, lower tech systems, that it's a little bit easier to ramp up. And by this, I mean primarily artillery and artillery ammunition. The United States has allies, especially the Turks, with a tremendous potential to produce artillery ammunition. The war in Ukraine has largely become a war of attrition between the drones and artillery on both sides striking the other. So I think while some munitions will be restricted and restrained because of the narrow gap, so to speak, in terms of production capability, that will get better over time. And in the meantime, we can ameliorate that shortage through provision of more artillery and sort of the dumber systems, if you will.
Understood. I hear your point, sir. That was Colonel Rich Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and Jamestown Foundation. Always a pleasure having you here on the broadcast with us.
Thanks for having me.